Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we jump into today's story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way YouTube knows you want more stories like this. Alright, let's get started. I never thought much about my neighbors. The house next door was just another typical part of suburban life, tucked behind a high wooden fence with a small, overgrown yard. People came and went, but we were just another set of faces in a row of houses. The neighborhood had its quirks, little dramas, loud dogs, kids that ran through the streets, but everything was normal. At least that's how I saw it. It all started when the Martins moved in. I didn't think much of it at first either. New neighbors, a middle-aged couple with a teenage son. They weren't the friendliest bunch, but they weren't unfriendly either. Just quiet. Mrs. Martin was the only one who ever really seemed to leave the house, and she'd always do so early in the morning, getting into her car and driving off. Mr. Martin, on the other hand, never left at all. Not once in the time they'd been living there did I see him leave the house, not even to take out the trash. The son, Chris, was a bit of an oddball too, but he kept to himself. I'd see him around sometimes, riding his bike in circles or standing on his front porch looking out into the street. But he didn't talk to anyone. Then came the nights. It wasn't until a few months in that I first noticed something strange. I had always been a night owl, staying up late and watching TV in the living room. I'd often glance out the window just to kill time, but one night something caught my eye. It was around 3 a.m., and I noticed a light flickering from the Martins' window. It wasn't the kind of flicker that happens when the power goes out either. It was more like a strobe, as if someone was walking around with a flashlight. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe Mrs. Martin was up late moving around the house, but the next night it happened again. And the next. The strobe-like light moving in fits and starts. It didn't make sense. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't have any real reason. It was just a weird light. I convinced myself it was nothing. The problem wasn't just the light. It was the noise. I started to hear it around the same time every night. Soft, slow creaks like floorboards under weight. At first I figured it was just the house settling, but the sounds were more rhythmic. There was something deliberate about it. It was like someone was pacing back and forth over and over. I could never pinpoint exactly where the sound came from, but it always seemed to be coming from the direction of their house. At first, I chalked it up to stress or my imagination, but after weeks of this pattern, I became more and more uneasy. It wasn't just the noises. It was the feeling. A nagging, insistent feeling that something was wrong, like I was being watched even though I couldn't put my finger on who was watching me. One night, it got worse. I woke up suddenly at 2 a.m., wide awake for no reason. The house was silent. Everything was still. But then I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from the direction of the Martins' house. It was faint, almost like a whisper against the wall. I crept over to the window and peeked out. The streetlight across the way gave me just enough light to see their front yard. The shadows were long and deep, but I could see the silhouette of someone standing in front of their house. Not moving, just standing there. I froze, heart pounding. My mind raced, but nothing made sense. I didn't see any lights on in the house. No one had come home. But there was someone standing there facing the house. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of their body. I watched for what felt like an eternity, but the person never moved. I didn't know what to think. I wanted to call the police, but stopped myself. What would I say? Someone standing in front of my neighbor's house? It sounded stupid, even to me. The next day, I went over to Mrs. Martin's house to ask if everything was okay. I don't know why I thought that would help, but I had to know. I knocked on the door and waited. After a long moment, she answered, her face drawn and pale. She looked at me like she hadn't seen another person in a while. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I noticed some lights last night and I just wanted to check if..." She cut me off. "Oh, everything's fine," she said, but her voice was shaky. Just a little trouble with the lights. Nothing to worry about." She didn't say much more after that. Her eyes darted around like she was expecting someone or something. I could tell she was uncomfortable, but I didn't press. I figured maybe she was dealing with something personal, but after that day, things only got stranger. The pacing sounds grew louder. It wasn't just creaking now. It was the sound of something heavier. Something moving deliberately, always back and forth, always at the same time. And then came the first time I heard her. Mrs. Martin. It was past midnight, and I couldn't sleep, so I was sitting by the window. When I heard it, soft at first, like a whisper. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it was unmistakable. A woman's voice, muffled and distant but frantic. It was the kind of voice that sounded like it was coming from the other side of a wall, but it was clear enough for me to understand that she was begging for something. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the fear in her voice. It was a panic I had never heard in anyone before, and I suddenly had a horrible thought. What if she was in trouble? What if something was wrong in that house? I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, I walked over to their house again, this time with the intention of really talking to her. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. The house was quiet. I waited for a while, but then I noticed something odd. There was no car in the driveway. Mrs. Martin's car was gone. The son, Chris, wasn't around either. I decided to take a step further, something I'm not proud of. I climbed over their backyard fence and approached the house from the back. The back door was unlocked, just slightly ajar, which didn't seem normal. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I slowly pushed the door open. Inside, everything was still, eerily so. The kitchen was neat, but there was something off about it. The fridge was empty, the counters bare, no food. It was like no one had been living there for a while. I walked through the house step by step, until I reached the stairs. The silence was deafening. I climbed up to the second floor, where I found the door to their bedroom slightly cracked open. When I pushed it open, I almost couldn't believe what I saw. The room was dark, but the lights weren't off. There was a soft, pulsating glow coming from somewhere beneath the bed. I crept closer, heart pounding in my chest. When I looked under the bed, I saw something that will haunt me forever. It was Mrs. Martin, sitting cross-legged, her back to the wall, her eyes wide open, staring into nothingness. She didn't blink, didn't move. She was alive, but not alive. She looked wrong. Her skin was pale, stretched tight over her bones, and her clothes were torn in places. There were dried streaks of tears down her face. But she was completely still. The strobe-like light was coming from a small flashlight she was holding, flicking on and off, but it didn't seem to be doing anything. The worst part was the way she was muttering, almost as if she was trying to speak, but the words didn't make sense. It was as though she was caught in some kind of loop, repeating the same things over and over again. I backed out of the room, my legs shaking beneath me. I had to get out of there, but I couldn't bring myself to leave her like that. What had happened to her? What had happened to the house? As I left through the back door, I turned one last time to look at the house. That's when I saw him, the man I had never seen leave the house. Mr. Martin, he was standing in the doorway watching me. There was no expression on his face, just the same blank stare I'd seen in Mrs. Martin's eyes. I didn't stick around to find out what would happen next. I ran all the way back to my house, and I didn't stop until I was locked inside. The police came the next day after I made a report. I couldn't tell them everything, didn't know how. They searched the house and found Mrs. Martin, just like I had left her. She was taken to a hospital, where they diagnosed her with severe psychological trauma. But they didn't find anything physically wrong with her. They also found Mr. Martin. He was gone, vanished without a trace. No one knew where he'd gone. They never found him. Chris, the son, wasn't there either. He was gone like his father. It was like the whole family just disappeared. The house was... I moved into the small, quiet neighborhood about 3 months ago, after my last apartment became too expensive for my tight budget. The house was small, but nice enough. An older single-story home with a white picket fence and a garden out front. It was the kind of place you'd find in one of those suburban neighborhoods, the kind you see in old movies, where everyone knows everyone, and life seems to move just a little slower. I had a feeling of safety when I first stepped through the door, like this could be the home I'd always been looking for. At first, everything seemed normal. The neighbors were friendly, and the street was peaceful. On one side of my house was an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Keller, who were kind enough to stop by and introduce themselves. On the other side was a younger couple, the Martins, who were always on the go, so we didn't interact much. But there was one house that was different. Right next door to me, the house I shared a fence with, lived a man named Greg, or at least that's what I gathered from the rare times I saw him. Greg was strange, but in a way that didn't set off alarm bells at first. He kept to himself, never bothering anyone. His house, while well-maintained on the outside, always seemed a little off. His yard was always dark, even during the day, as if he kept his blinds drawn all the time. But I didn't think too much about it. People have their quirks, right? What I did notice, though, was that Greg never seemed to sleep. It was subtle at first. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to hear the soft hum of his TV, or see a faint light through his windows. At first, I chalked it up to him being a night owl or working late shifts. Maybe he was just one of those people who didn't need a lot of sleep. But then I started noticing more oddities. One night I woke up around 3 a.m. needing to use the bathroom. As I passed by my window, I saw Greg's porch light on. Odd, because he never left lights on after midnight. I didn't think much of it, though, and went back to bed. The next morning, I found that the light was still on. I checked the time, 7 a.m. He hadn't turned it off all night. This was the first time I started feeling a little uneasy. I mentioned it to Mrs. Keller, the neighbor next door, when I ran into her a few days later. She just smiled and waved it off, saying that Greg had always been a bit of a loner and that I shouldn't worry about him. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then came the noises. It wasn't anything specific, just a series of faint sounds that seemed to come from next door. Sometimes it was the scraping of furniture. Other times it was the sound of things being knocked over. Once I could have sworn I heard muffled voices, though I couldn't tell if it was a conversation or just random noise. I told myself it was probably just Greg moving things around late at night, but the sounds kept getting weirder. One night, I woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps, pacing back and forth in Greg's house. The sound was rhythmic, almost like someone was nervously walking from one end of the house to the other, back and forth, back and forth. I lay there in my bed, wide awake, listening for what seemed like hours. The pacing never stopped. It was as if Greg didn't need to rest, didn't need to sleep. I tried to ignore it, but it became harder too. I'd go to bed every night, dreading the sound of those footsteps. The pacing was always there, like some invisible force at work in the quiet house next door. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had insomnia, or maybe it was just his way of dealing with stress. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't that simple. One evening, about a week after the footsteps started, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was around midnight and I couldn't sleep. I decided to go for a walk around the block, hoping the fresh air would help me unwind. As I walked past Greg's house, I noticed something strange. His living room light was on, and the curtains were slightly parted. And through the crack in the curtains, I saw him. He was sitting on his couch, staring at the TV. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, and his posture was stiff. It was the way he sat that freaked me out. The unnatural stillness, like he hadn't moved in hours. His head didn't shift and his body didn't twitch. It was like he was frozen in place, staring into the screen. Yet his eyes were hollow. I couldn't look away. I was about to turn and walk away when I saw something else. His reflection in the window. It wasn't just him sitting there. There was something else, something I hadn't noticed before. His face was different, distorted. The reflection showed a man with hollow eyes, a gaunt face, and a twisted grin that wasn't there before. It was as if the reflection was mocking him, or worse, trying to break free from his own image. I backed away slowly, not wanting to make any noise. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew I needed to get out of there. I rushed back to my house and locked the door behind me. My heart was pounding and my hands were trembling. I wanted to call someone, but I didn't know who would believe me. Over the next few days, I tried to keep my distance from Greg's house. I avoided looking over at his windows, but the noise continued. The pacing, the faint murmurs, the strange lights in the middle of the night. It was all too much. It wasn't just that Greg didn't sleep. It was the fact that he never stopped moving, never stopped pacing, as if he were stuck in an endless cycle of restlessness. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just his behavior that was odd. It was his presence. Felt like he was always there, even when I wasn't looking. Then came the night that everything changed. I had been lying in bed trying to get some sleep despite the noise next door, when I heard something new. It wasn't the usual pacing or sounds of furniture being moved. It was a loud thud followed by a crash. I shot up in bed, my heart racing. Was something wrong? Was Greg hurt? I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Not sure if I should call or not, but too scared to do nothing. The operator answered quickly, and I told her that I thought someone might be in danger next door. She asked me if I was sure, and I hesitated. What could I say? I didn't know what was happening, only that I was scared. I hung up before they could send anyone, deciding to check things out myself. I grabbed a flashlight and walked cautiously across the yard, feeling a chill in the air. I made my way to the back of Greg's house and peered through the window. What I saw through that window is something I'll never forget. The room was a mess. Furniture was overturned, and there were scattered papers and books everywhere. But it wasn't the mess that horrified me. It was the fact that Greg was still sitting there, in the middle of it all, staring at the TV screen. His body was stiff, but this time his head was tilted at an unnatural angle, almost as if he were listening for something. And in that moment I realized it wasn't just that Greg didn't sleep. He never needed to sleep. He wasn't like anyone I had ever met. Something inside him had snapped long ago. I stumbled back from the window, gasping for air. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I had to get away from there, but I didn't know where to go. I went back to my house, locked the door, and sat in the dark, waiting for something to happen. The next morning, the police arrived. I wasn't sure how they knew, but they were knocking on Greg's door. I overheard them talking to Mrs. Keller, asking if she had seen anything unusual. Mrs. Keller was crying, saying she'd always thought something was wrong but didn't know how to help him. It turned out that Greg hadn't been just pacing or staring at the TV. He'd been hiding something dark and terrible. When the police broke into his house, they found his journals, filled with obsessive writing. He had chronicled every moment of his waking life, every thought, every second he had spent awake. He hadn't slept in years, and his mind had deteriorated because of it. His obsession had grown to the point where he couldn't tell reality from his own delusions. He had been keeping people in his house, only they weren't alive. They were just remnants of his broken mind. Greg wasn't just a sleep-deprived man. He had gone insane, trapped in a never-ending cycle of wakefulness. I later learned that his house had been abandoned by his family years ago. They had left, unable to handle the mental toll his condition was taking on him. The police said that Greg would be taken into custody, but I never saw him again. They closed the house down, and I eventually moved out. I couldn't stay in that neighborhood anymore, not with the memories of what I moved into my first apartment a little over a year ago. A small one-bedroom place in a quiet building on the outskirts of the city. The rent was affordable, and the neighborhood was calm, not much noise at all, perfect for me. I didn't need much, just a place to call my own after years of living with roommates and bouncing from place to place. At first, everything seemed fine. The building was old, the walls thin, and the floors creaked with every step, but it had a charm to it. I liked the faded wallpaper in the hallway, the squeaky elevator, and the way the sun poured in through the cracked windows in the common areas. It felt homey, and that was what I needed. But there was one thing that I couldn't quite shake from the beginning. My neighbor. It wasn't anything obvious at first. The first few weeks I barely even noticed him. He lived directly next door, on the other side of the thin walls. I had heard him moving around a few times, but nothing more. His presence wasn't intrusive, at least not at first. But then the weird little things started happening. The first time I realized something was off was one night when I was lying in bed, trying to sleep. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. I could hear him, my neighbor, moving around next door. But not just walking around. It was strange. It was like he was pacing back and forth, back and forth. The steps would stop, then start again. And this went on for hours. No stopping. Sounds of him sitting down, taking a break, nothing. It freaked me out a little. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to maybe insomnia or something. But it didn't stop. The pacing continued every night for the next few days, every night around the same time. I started to get concerned. What kind of person paced like that for hours on end? And why? At first I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. But then I started noticing other strange things. On days when I was home during the day, I would hear him moving around in there, sometimes louder than usual. Like he was slamming things or rearranging furniture. But there would be no real sound of a door opening or closing, like he was just shifting things inside without ever coming in or out. I never saw him, not once, not even in passing in the hallways. It was like he was a ghost, just a presence in the building that I couldn't ever fully understand. The thing that unnerved me the most, though, was that I never heard him sleep. I never heard any sounds that might suggest he was asleep. No snoring, no quiet breathing, no rustling sheets, nothing. He was always moving around or pacing, even late at night when everyone else was in bed. After a few weeks of this, I started to feel exhausted. It was hard to sleep when I could hear his constant activity, and I found myself getting paranoid, wondering what kind of person lived next door. Who doesn't sleep? Who just paces around for hours every night? It made no sense. I had to know more, had to figure out what was going on. One day, after a particularly restless night, I decided I was going to find out. I had to. I needed to know if I was just imagining things or if something strange was really happening. I decided I was going to knock on his door, just to introduce myself. Maybe ask him if everything was all right. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I figured a casual conversation might give me some answers. So I stood in front of his door, hesitating. I could hear nothing from the other side. No movement, no sound, just silence. It felt unnervingly quiet. I knocked once, then twice, and waited. Still nothing. I was about to turn away when I heard the faintest rustle inside. I knocked again, a little louder this time, but still no response. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door cracked open, just slightly. A man stood in the doorway, tall, thin, and pale. His face was hollow, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years, and his eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. Or maybe weeks. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared at me, and I felt a wave of unease wash over me. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. "Hi, I'm your neighbor," I said, my voice sounding weak even to myself. I just wanted to introduce myself. He blinked slowly, then nodded once. The silence between us stretched on, and I began to wonder if he was going to say anything at all. I've noticed you've been up pretty late," I added, trying to sound casual. "Everything okay?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. He just stared at me with those hollow eyes. And then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, he said, "I don't sleep." I didn't know what to say to that. My brain couldn't process it. "What do you mean?" It's all I could manage. "I don't sleep," he repeated, almost mechanically. "I don't need to." It was then that I noticed something strange about him. His skin was almost too pale, and his hair, though it wasn't long, looked greasy, like he hadn't bothered to comb it in days. His clothes were disheveled, and I could see bags under his eyes, as if he hadn't closed them in a very long time. Before I could ask more, he closed the door without another word. And that was it. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. What had just happened? What did he mean he didn't need to sleep? For the next few days, I kept my distance. I didn't hear him pacing as much, but I could still feel his presence, like he was always there, lurking just behind the thin walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something wasn't right with him. But then things took a darker turn. It started with strange sounds at night. At first, it was just the occasional loud thud or clatter, things that didn't make sense. But then the noises became more frequent. It sounded like things were being thrown, like furniture was being overturned. One night, I heard what I can only describe as a loud bang, followed by the unmistakable sound of scraping, as if someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. It went on for hours, keeping me awake and on edge. I wanted to call the building manager, or even the police, but I didn't know if I had any real reason to. Maybe it was just him pacing again. Maybe something had fallen. But it didn't feel right. The following night, I decided to do something about it. I grabbed my phone and went out into the hall, standing quietly by his door, listening. The sounds were louder now, almost frantic. I could hear him talking, muttering to himself. It was unintelligible, but it didn't sound like normal speech. It was erratic, jumbled. I stood there for a few minutes just listening to the madness, wondering if I should knock again. But this time I was afraid. I didn't know if I wanted to know what was happening behind that door. Then, as I was about to leave, I heard it. A scream, a loud, piercing scream. It was cut off suddenly, and then everything went quiet. I froze. My heart raced. I had to check, had to make sure he was okay or if something had happened. Without thinking, I knocked on his door again. This time I didn't wait for a response. I turned the handle and pushed the door open slowly, cautiously. What I saw inside made my stomach drop. The apartment was in complete disarray. Furniture was flipped over, and there were papers scattered everywhere. The walls were marked with what looked like scratches, deep claw-like scratches, and in the center of it all stood my neighbor, staring blankly at the wall. He wasn't moving, just standing there in complete silence. I stepped inside, my breath shallow, and that's when I saw it. A pile of photographs on the floor. They were all of me. Every single one. Taken from my apartment, from my window, from my hallway. There were even photos of me when I didn't think anyone could see me. It made my blood run cold. I turned to look at him, but he didn't respond. His eyes were wide open, but they were vacant, empty. It was as though he wasn't even aware of my presence. And then I heard it, his voice low and barely audible. "I don't sleep," he whispered. "I don't need to sleep." The weight of the words hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just insomnia. It was something deeper, darker. He wasn't human anymore, at least not in the way I understood it. I backed away slowly, feeling like I was suffocating in the room. I had to get out. I turned and ran out of the apartment, slamming the door behind me. The next morning, I called the building manager and reported everything. How the apartment was in disarray, how the neighbor was acting strange. The manager promised to check it out, but when he came back, he had no answers. He told me the neighbor had moved out, but no one had seen him. I was living in a pretty quiet neighborhood. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was home. Houses lined the street in neat rows, with their white picket fences and well-kept lawns. The air always smelled fresh, and the mornings felt peaceful, with the sun just starting to warm the ground and the chirping of birds filling the air. It was the kind of place where you didn't worry about leaving your door unlocked or walking down the street at night. Everyone knew each other, and we all kept to ourselves, which was fine with me. But there was one thing, or rather, one person, that made things feel off. It was the neighbor next door. His name was Thomas, though nobody really knew him well. He'd moved in about 6 months ago, and ever since then, the atmosphere around the house had started to change. At first, I thought it was just because he was new, and people didn't always open up right away. But after a while, I started noticing some strange things about him. For one, he never left his house during the day. Or at least not when anyone was around to see. You could see the shadows moving behind his curtains at night, but never during the day. I'd see his car in the driveway, parked like it had been there for ages, and I'd think he must have been asleep or working from home, though I never saw him leave to go to an office or anything like that. Every now and then I'd catch him peering out the window, his face half lit in the glow of the porch light, but he'd always duck back behind the curtain before I could even wave or say hello. His house was a bit of a mystery, too. The lawn wasn't kept up like the others, and the grass seemed to grow a little longer each week. No flowers in the garden, no decorations for holidays. Nothing to show that anyone lived there except for the car and the faint sounds of movement behind those closed windows. It felt like the kind of place where people came and went, but never really lived. I first started to feel like something was wrong one evening. I was walking my dog, Max, around the block like I always did after dinner. It was getting dark, and I was about to cross the street when I noticed a flicker of movement in Thomas's front window. It wasn't unusual to see lights on at night, but there was something off about how he was standing there. It was like he was watching something, but his face was completely expressionless. I don't know why, but the way he just stood there made my skin crawl. I shrugged it off, though. Maybe it was just the angle of the light, or maybe I was tired. But then the noises started. Late at night, I'd hear sounds coming from his house. At first it was subtle. A low thud here, a dragging sound there, something like furniture being pushed around or something heavy hitting the floor. But it wasn't consistent. And after a while, it started to feel more like a pattern, like he was doing something deliberately when everyone else was asleep. It wasn't just random noise. It was disturbing. One night after I heard a particularly loud bang followed by a long scrape, I decided to call him. I wasn't close with Thomas, but I figured I should at least check on him. Maybe he'd fallen or something. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. I knocked. Still nothing. After a few minutes I left, feeling a bit uneasy but thinking he was probably just asleep. But the next night the noise came again. This time I was awake, staring at my bedroom ceiling, trying to ignore the sound. The banging came around 2 a.m., followed by the scraping sound I'd heard before. It sounded like furniture, maybe a chair or a table being moved in a way that didn't seem normal. It was loud enough that Max started to bark. He was always a good dog, but something about that noise made him restless, and I couldn't get him to settle. It kept happening every night at the same time, and each time I felt more and more unnerved. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just rearranging his house or something. But every time I passed by his house during the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His blinds were always drawn. There was never any sign of him outside, even when the weather was nice. It felt like his entire life was lived in those four walls, behind the curtains, never once stepping outside. One evening, I decided to take a walk and see if I could catch a glimpse of him. It was after dinner, and the sky had that fading orange glow that made everything feel soft. As I walked past his house, I saw his car was parked out front, the headlights dimmed. The porch light was on, and the faintest glow was coming from one of the windows, like a shadow moving behind the blinds. I slowed my pace, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. I don't know why, but something was pulling me to the house. I stood there for a few moments just staring at the window. The glow seemed to shift slightly, like someone was moving around inside. And then I saw it, a figure, just standing there. For a long time, not moving, almost as if it was waiting for something. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, and Max tugged at the leash, pulling me a little further away from the house. I kept staring at the window, but after a few moments, the figure disappeared. I quickly turned around and left, my heart pounding in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound came again, louder than before. It wasn't just furniture being moved. Now there were muffled voices, low and indistinct. They weren't coming from the TV, because I could hear the TV when it was on. These were different, like someone was whispering, but there was no way anyone else could be in that house. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks on me, but I knew deep down something was wrong. Days went by and the pattern continued. The noises grew worse, more erratic. There were sounds of things being thrown around, something heavy hitting the ground. followed by the same scraping noises that made my skin crawl. The worst part was that no matter how many times I looked, Thomas never came outside. His car sat in the driveway day after day, never moved. His blinds were always shut, and even the smallest sound from his house set my nerves on edge. It was one night, maybe a week later, that I finally decided to confront him. I had to know what was going on. The noises had gotten so bad that I could barely sleep. My anxiety was through the roof, and I couldn't take it anymore. I knocked on his door again. This time I wasn't leaving until I got an answer. I knocked harder and I waited. The door was cold under my knuckles, and it felt like I'd been standing there for ages. Just when I thought I might give up and leave, I heard a faint sound from the other side. The door creaked open just a little bit, and there he was. Thomas. He looked off. His hair was messy, his eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and there was a strange stillness to him, like he wasn't really seeing me but was more lost in his own world. Before I could say anything, he quickly looked around, then stepped back into the house, leaving the door ajar. It was the weirdest thing. I didn't know whether to step inside or just leave, but something about it made me want to leave. I backed away slowly, and as I turned to go, I saw him standing in the doorway, watching me from the shadows. That was the last time I ever tried to talk to him. A few days later, something happened that finally made everything clear. It was late in the afternoon when I saw the police cars. 2 of them parked in front of his house. I watched from my window as they knocked on the door, waited for a minute, and then forced it open. I had no idea what was going on, but my curiosity got the better of me. I slipped outside and tried to get closer without being noticed. It didn't take long for the officers to come out, carrying something wrapped in a heavy tarp. I couldn't see exactly what it was, but the way they handled it, the way they moved, made it clear it was something serious. They put it into the back of their squad car, and a few more officers went into the house. I stood there frozen, watching. Then one of the officers noticed me. He walked over slowly, and for the first time I saw the look on his face, something between sadness and disbelief. "You didn't know?" he asked. I shook my head, feeling my heart race in my chest. "Your neighbor he's been living here alone for years. We've been tracking him for months. There were reports of noises, disturbances, but no one ever suspected." He stopped himself, and I could tell he didn't want to go further. "We found something we didn't expect inside." He paused, then looked at me one last time. "You should stay away from that house from now on." The next few weeks were a blur. The neighborhood slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though a certain tension lingered in the air. Nobody really spoke about it, but we all knew. The truth was out. I moved into the old house on Elm Street early in May, because the rent was cheap, and I needed a place that was close to work. The house had peeling paint, a sagging porch, and trees that pressed their branches to the windows. Still, I was grateful. I was tired of crowded apartments, noisy neighbors in close walls. This house sat on a quiet block of single-story homes. Lawns overgrown, cars parked on lawns, sidewalks cracked. It was older than most, but it felt stable, real. I thought I could make it mine. From the first night I heard sounds, not the kind of strange shrieks or footsteps in the attic. Nothing supernatural. Just a soft, steady tapping like fingernails drumming at wood. I lay in bed, heart pounding, trying to figure where it came from. Was it the wind? Branches brushing the siding? I told myself yes. I fell asleep with those doubts. The next day I met the neighbor. I only saw the shape of him from behind a window, shadowed by drawn blinds. He moved quietly, almost never. His house was similar to mine. Wood walls, narrow front yard, old porch swing. He had curtains always closed. I noticed at dusk a dim light in his windows, but only one small lamp. Yellow light, never bright. I saw him once at dawn, standing in the front yard, arms by his sides, looking at the street. He was skinny, pale, his hair a tangled mess. He never waved, never nodded, just stood. Then he went inside. That night, the tapping came again. I lay in bed listening. It was rhythmic. Every 10 seconds or so, a thump, as if someone struck a board with fingertips. I turned on the lamp, checked the windows. Nothing. I thought maybe the wall shared a thin partition with the neighbor's house. I thought maybe he moved furniture, or walked heavily, or tapped on the wall. I tried to ignore it. Sleep was fitful. Over the next few nights, the tapping grew more frequent. Sometimes I heard it about every other second. Sometimes it came from the floor, sometimes from the wall between my bedroom and the empty space beside the house. It never came from inside my room directly, never on the ceiling, never above me. Always from the side wall or floor under the wall. I started to stand by the wall in the dark and press my ear to it, listening. I heard something small, metal maybe, tapping or wood. Each time I thought I caught a shape in the dim. A hand perhaps, or a tool. But I saw nothing. The neighbor's curtains stayed closed. The dim lamp never moved. During the day, I tried to inspect the sides of our connected houses. I noticed the neighbor's siding was warped near the ground. There were gaps, cracks, some boards loose. The foundation looked hollow. I thought maybe his basement or crawl space might be accessible. I also saw little holes near the baseboard inside my living room, tiny gaps where light peeked in during the morning sun. I measured, looked, tried peering outside from the lawn. I saw something small in the gap. A wooden board twisted, a nail sticking out, maybe a small board underneath. I pushed back a loose board with my finger. It felt hollow behind it. I touched the wood and pressed. Something moved. My finger felt wet or damp like moisture, or maybe some biological thing I could not tell. I cleaned up, moved away anything that touched that wall. I slept with earplugs. I played music softly. Nothing stopped the tapping. It woke me too early. Once I woke before dawn, I lay still, heartbeat loud in my ears. I heard scuffling outside the wall, like someone walking on the ground outside my house, pacing, then scratching. I held perfectly still. The scratching moved along the length of the wall, from corner to corner. It paused, then 3 knocks. Then silence for a few minutes. Then tapping resumed. I decided to inspect the neighbor's yard by daylight. I walked around to his side. I saw a small door at the base of his house, like a crawl space door. It was nailed tightly shut. The door was warped too. I saw beneath it gaps where light fell through in cracks. I reached down, touched the wood. It was rotten. I saw dark stains around the edges. I wondered if water damage or something worse. I noticed a trail of small marks in the dirt leading behind some bushes. Scuff marks, as if something had been dragged. I followed them quietly. They ended at a stack of wooden boards, overgrown with weeds. I moved back the boards. Beneath I saw a small opening like a vent, maybe leading inside crawl space. The opening was big enough for something the size of a cat, maybe larger. But I saw nothing move. I backed away, unsettled. At home I tried to convince myself it was just animals, rats, squirrels, raccoons, mice, something wild. But the tapping was too regular, too deliberate. The scuffling outside too clean, as if someone walked. And the noises all along the wall between my house and his. That shared wall seemed to be the passage. Something was going on. One afternoon I came home early. I parked behind my house, walked in quietly. I set down my bag, tried to be silent. I heard the tapping. It began just as I opened the front door. I froze, moved slowly into my living room. The tapping came from the wall to my right. I moved closer. The wall was cold. I put my hand on it, trembled, felt vibrations, small ones. Then I stepped back. I took a tool, a screwdriver, and tried to pry off a small panel in that wall. I found a wood panel loose in one place. I pried it gently. Behind it was darkness, very close, maybe a foot behind. Then I used a flashlight. I looked. I saw narrow space, small beam, wires, insulation. But deeper, just out of sight, something moved. Something slid away. A dark shape, low, crawling. The insulation rustled. A smell, damp, musty, rotting wood. I pulled back, staring. I rehearsed in my mind what it could be. Person? An animal? A wild cat? But it seemed too quiet for animal. Too deliberate. I yanked the panel back into place. Heart racing. I walked away. That night I could not sleep. I stayed up until morning. I kept the light on in that room. I tried to think. I searched online for stories. People living next door to others who had mental illness, hoarding, hiding things. Prisoners. I thought perhaps the man next door was keeping someone or something in his crawl space. Perhaps he was ill. Perhaps dangerous. The idea terrified me, but I still had no proof. Over the next days, I watched him. I sat by my front window early in the morning. I saw him leave his house once. He went into his backyard. He carried a big wooden board, dirty, splintered. He dragged it slowly behind his house. I saw him hammer something in the ground. The next night, the tapping moved. It was louder, nearer. The wall trembled with each hit. The floor at the base of the wall vibrated. I put earphones in, but even then I heard vibrations in my bed. I could see shadow lines where the boards warped. I saw wood move slightly at night, as if something pressing from behind. I bought a thermal camera rental. I wanted to see heat signatures behind the wall. I pointed it where the wall leaned. The camera showed weird shapes, darker shadows, cold spots, tiny bright spots. One area showed a patch that was darker than the rest, like an empty cavity. Another patch had warmth but no outline. Not a human shape, but something warm, breathing maybe, or living organ. I took still pictures. I froze when I saw one frame where inside the wall space there was what looked like an eye glint, reflecting the light of the camera. But I thought perhaps a rodent or stray cat. But the sound was definitely too big for a rodent. I slept poorly. I skipped work some days. I could not stand that sound. It hurt me. My nerves twitched. I stopped touching the wall. I covered that bedroom wall with thick quilts. Still, I heard the tapping. It found other entry. The baseboard beside my bed, the floor beneath it. Sometimes it was a dull thunk under the floor, as if someone tapped from under the house. One morning, I woke to a cold breath on my leg. I was sure of it. A draft from under the floorboards. I saw air moving under the floor crack. A board was loose. The air smelled damp, like mold, mildew, moist earth. I peeked under. I could not see far. Just darkness. But I felt a presence. I pulled back, heart and throat. I started sleeping in the living room, far from the shared wall. I blocked all windows. I closed blinds. I moved furniture so I felt safer. Still, I heard noises at dawn. I would wake, realizing I slept only for a few minutes. My watch showed 3-4 a.m. The tapping had moved again, now in the wall near a corner of the living room near the ceiling joint. Something shifting above or behind the wall. Then crawling or sliding. Then silence. Then tapping again. I resolved to investigate deeper. I bought tools, pry bar, gloves, flashlight, dust mask. In daylight, I opened the crawl space door at my neighbor's house base. It was nailed, dry wood, holes around nails loose. I pulled nails carefully, heard wood crack. I pried open. Inside was damp space, low ceiling, dirt floor, wood supports, insulation. I crawled in inch by inch, feet dragging dirt. My flashlight cut through darkness. I saw rotted boards, broken beams, and then I saw an old mattress stained, damp, water-rotted. Bits of mold, many layers of dust. Nearby, clothes, shoes. Some that looked adult size, some small. Some toys, soft toy, dirty and torn. I cursed under my breath, no voice. I felt bile in my throat. The smell overwhelmed me. Mildew, decay, sweat, feces, urine. A smell from a place closed in, never cleaned. I saw marks on the dirt floor. Drag lines as if something heavy had been moved. Deep depressions in places. Plank boards placed over damp ground. I saw food wrappers, tin cans, water bottles. I saw evidence of someone living there for potentially weeks, months. Under the mattress, I saw a thin arm, bare, lit by my flashlight. Not moving, I froze. I flexed my fingers, heart pounding. I trained light on the spot. A person? I moved into the house at the end of a quiet street in a mid-sized town. The lot had a broad front porch and tall windows boarded by thin curtains. I always liked homes where light could spill in. After years in cramped apartments, this house felt like breathing. Something about having a yard, trees overhead, a fence thin enough to see the neighbor's yard, but not so thin that privacy was gone. It seemed perfect. Soon after I moved in, I noticed the house next door. A low hedge separated our driveways. Their porch light was always on. Even at 3 in the morning, I could see it glowing through the leaves. The front windows were large, curtains drawn only part way. Sometimes I saw faint forms moving. Sometimes I saw nothing but light. At first I thought I was imagining things. New place, new noises. But I began to piece together patterns. When I woke at night, I saw a shadow behind the windows across the hedge. A shape that stood just inside by the glass facing out, maybe watching me. I felt eyes on me more than once. I wondered if the neighbor slept at all. Night after night the light stayed on. Always, very dim in parts, bright in others. Sometimes one bulb, sometimes several. Sometimes floodlight from the back aimed toward the fence. I saw it sweep slowly like someone telling me, I see you. I work nights. My shift ends at 2 or 3 in the morning, depending. I come home in darkness. The drive is long, the road quiet. I used to enjoy the walk from car to door. The hush, the breeze. After a few weeks, that walk grew heavier. I noticed footsteps. Not exactly footsteps or distant hums. The neighbor's lights going on, flickering. Sometimes the TV screen glowing. Sometimes machinery humming. I tried to trace it. What would someone do all night, never sleeping? I assumed cameras. Maybe monitors. I assumed the person next door was always awake. Always watching. I avoided looking directly at their windows after dark. I pulled my curtains closed. But I couldn't block the feeling. That curtain breach where light escaped. The shapes. Sometimes I saw the silhouette of someone walking back and forth, even in the small hours of dawn. No rest. In the first few days, I thought maybe they had insomnia. But insomnia, people still sleep sometimes, toss, close eyes. But this seemed like full alertness. I saw lights in every room, upstairs, downstairs, basement too. I saw a dim glow from below the house line through vents at ground level under their front porch. I felt vibrations occasionally, slight humming, buzzing, like electronics working. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I had moved somewhere quiet. But the presence was always there. One night I came home later than usual. It was nearly 4 a.m. The sky faintly lightening in the east. My headlights washed our shared driveway, the hedge moving in slight breeze. I locked my car, walked toward the porch. As I crossed the lawn, I noticed the neighbor's porch light was brighter than usual. I froze. Behind the lower window I saw a figure standing, too still. Just standing, facing me. Just standing. It felt like hours passed before I moved. Inside I closed the door, locked all locks. My heart pounded. I sat at my living room window just watching. The neighbor's windows revealed shapes in motion. Someone pacing upstairs. Someone climbing down. Lights in the kitchen, no sound. I couldn't hear voices, but I knew someone was there. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair by the window in darkness, watching until dawn. The neighbor's house never darkened. Roof lights, bedside lamps, kitchen lamps, porch. Always on, weeks passed. I watched patterns. I noted which lights turned off for brief moments. The bulb flickering out, then a new one switching on. I saw a person cleaning windows in early morning light, scrubbing glass from outside. I saw them bringing in cardboard boxes, plastic containers. Movement everywhere. Sometimes I caught sight of cameras, small, likely security boxes, pointed toward both mine and their yard. I saw one when trimming my hedge. I saw a little silver dome peeking from under the eaves. I pulled a camera aside. Lens glinting, I stared. It pointed, I feared, toward my yard. I wanted to confront, but I feared response. I feared what I might learn. I feared I'd be alone. I started spending more time outside in daylight. Gardening, mowing the lawn. I tried to seem occupied. I didn't face that house. I avoided looking at their windows. Still, I felt their presence. My dreams changed. I dreamt of them standing by their window, watching me sleep. I dreamt of their light following me across rooms. I dreamt I heard footsteps at midnight in my hallway, even when no one was there. Woke often, heart pounding. My skin prickled. People at work noticed I was tired. I said little. I told a coworker I thought I read too much before bed. I didn't say the neighbor. I didn't want people to think me paranoid. Then one night everything changed. I came home after shift. The moon hidden, rain falling soft but steady. I unlocked the door under a low-hanging bough from a tree. Water dripped. My jacket damp. I stepped inside, set my keys on the table. I poured tea. The kettle hissed. I turned toward the window to glance outside. In the neighbor's yard, in their driveway light, I saw a small figure crouching, moving something. I froze, tea sloshing in the cup. It was not a person. It looked like a camera or lens, mounted low, maybe hidden in plants, maybe somewhere pointed at my porch. I moved closer to that window. I held my breath. Rain splashed. I crept out the front door in rain, covering my feet. I stepped across wet grass. I reached the spot where the space between houses was narrow. I saw the object clearly, a camera, mounted low on a stake among bushes. I touched it. Rain dripped on my hand. The glass was wet. It was alive, gleaming. The lens pointed toward my front door. I yanked it out. I could feel wires, maybe power lines running underground or through the soil. I pulled, the stake making a wet tearing sound. I dragged it toward my house, smashed it on concrete. The glass cracked, shattered, wires ran out. I left it there, broken. I ran back inside, locked all doors. I stood at the window watching. No porch light in the neighbor's house turned off. But I saw movement, a silhouette at their door, a figure outside under porch light, eyes, maybe glasses, glinting in the dim. They were looking toward me. I ducked. That night I slept lightly on the couch in my living room, curtains drawn, lights off. I awoke before dawn. In the dim hour, I figured out that something changed. The neighbor's lights were off in many rooms. The porch light was dimmed. The TV had gone off. Kitchen light, now only a small bulb. Upstairs, windows dark. I watched. Dawn came. Birds sang. The house next door was quiet. No silhouettes pacing. No shape at windows, no hums. Over the next day, I checked every window, every fence line. I found more cameras. Small, hidden in corners of downspouts under eaves. I removed them all. Each I smashed or pulled, pried loose wires, blocked lenses. I covered spots with plastic, wood, planters. I closed up the view. I also called authorities, not about ghosts, but about invasion of privacy. I brought up the cameras I found directed toward my property. I said I felt watched constantly. They came, took photos, collected the smashed cameras as evidence. I spoke finally with a neighbor I trusted a little, on the street behind me. I asked if they had noticed anything from the other side. They told me the house next door was occupied by someone who did shift work. Someone who said they needed to monitor something, security, maybe business materials, but always awake, always lighted, always alert. The police said that doesn't give someone the right to spy or surveil. Within days, the pattern changed. The lights in the neighbor's house dimmed in late hours. Some bulbs stayed off through the night. The rooms were not so bright. The kitchen dark during my own sleep. The porch light switched off at last, replaced by a motion sensor lamp. I slept better. My curtains stayed drawn, but I did not fear. When I walked through my yard at midnight, I did not glance nervously at their windows. Months passed. The neighbor still had lights sometimes at odd hours, maybe for work or project, but they started using blackout curtains. The cameras I removed were not replaced. I saw fewer forms at windows. I saw fewer lights sweeping across my yard. One night the house next door went dark. No porch light, no kitchen glow, no upstairs bulbs, no movement I could see. I stood outside on my porch steps, looked across the hedge. Stars above. The moon a thin slice. Silence. I realized then I hadn't been watched in weeks. The weight on my chest was gone. My dreams no longer had that feeling of being seen. In the morning I left for work. As I shut my front door, I glanced once at the next house. The porch was dark, the curtains drawn wide. I saw no shape at windows. When I returned during daylight, I saw the neighbor bringing in trash bins from the curb. A person carrying cans, feeding something in the yard, inspecting plants. No cámaras visible. I waved as I passed the hedge. They nodded or maybe just adjusted their hat. I felt calm. I locked my door. I turned out lights in my house at night without anxiety. I let moonlight filter in. If I heard water dripping or distant cars, I didn't wonder if they were part of some surveillance. The house next door eventually became less a threat and more a neighbor. Someone who had odd hours, Lights on late, perhaps working in basement or office. It was never perfect. I still sometimes see twilight glow behind one window, but it doesn't matter. I sleep. I understand now that people can be strange. That someone may never sleep for reasons. Work demands, insomnia, commitment to tasks. But that does not give them the right to invade your space. I moved into the house on Maple Street on a quiet fall evening. The leaves were already turning, and when I unlocked the front door that first night, the air smelled of damp wood and old concrete. I had left behind a small city apartment, cramped and always noisy, hoping for peace and space. My new home was a modest 2-story house, old but solid, with a large yard and trees shading the windows. I was alone in the house for the first few nights, letting boxes whisper into place. It felt good finally having room to breathe. Little did I know how much I truly did need space, not just in my house, but from what was next door. Next door was a house almost identical to mine. Same style, same roof shape, even the same kind of siding. I took comfort in that symmetry. It meant something familiar. I noticed my neighbor the first night I moved in. Light in the next door windows stayed on long after sunset. Curtains were drawn, but dim bulb glowed. In the middle of the night, when I woke for water or noise, I could see that pale light through thin curtains. I assumed they were a night owl, someone who handled insomnia or graveyard shift. I did not think too much of it. After a week, I started noticing more. Doors would open in the neighbor's house. Shuttered windows would shift. The hum of plumbing running at hours when I expected silence. The floor squeaked sometimes. Faint footsteps when I expected none. Walls thin enough to let me hear breathing at odd moments. Sometimes sheets rustled as though someone changed position. All night long, never the slightest sound of sleep. Never the slumber of deep rest. I tried to believe they were just awake. Maybe working late on something. A writer or someone caring for a sick family member. I wanted to believe normal things. I paid attention to times. Around 3 in the morning, I would hear water in their pipes. Tap opening, then closing, flooding, then shutting. Around 4, faint thuds from upstairs or something dragging. Around 5, footsteps again, pacing back and forth. No voices, no conversation, just movement and sound. I felt uneasy. I could hear hinges squeak. Sometimes the sound of something heavy being placed down or dragged across floorboards. I pictured furniture, boxes, perhaps someone reorganizing, but always the motion would go on. After those hours at dawn, lights would switch off, curtains drawn, and everything silent until dusk again. At first, I tried to ignore it. I thought I was imagining more than I should. Sleep deprivation does strange things. Insomnia, vivid dreams, hallucinations. Maybe wind catching a branch against the siding. Maybe plumbing echoes. I kept telling myself the thin wall between our houses carried more than it should. That I was hearing things I made up. But then I noticed other details that did not add up. One morning I walked to my backyard when sun was high and saw in the neighbor's yard just the traffic of light and shadow, but no sign of life. No car in driveway, no movement in curtains, garden unkempt, no trash cans taken out. I saw bags of trash inside their side garage piled higher than usual. I saw newspapers unread at the doorstep. I saw mail sitting by the door for several days. I watched from my window. The lights stayed off in daylight. At night they came on. The front porch light, the hallway at least, maybe bulbs upstairs glowing faintly, but no silhouette moving in the front window when the streetlight passed by. I felt something was wrong. I thought about checking in, calling the municipal house registry or welfare, maybe even the police. But each time I hesitated. No conversations. No evidence of crime yet. I valued privacy. I did not want to assume the worst. Maybe the neighbor was sick, confined to one part of the house, maybe bedridden. Maybe either ill or even unconscious. Maybe they rarely moved in daylight. But how could someone stay alive? I questioned whether I really saw all that, or whether I was projecting. Then came the night I saw something through a crack in my bedroom blinds. I had gone to bed early because I needed rest. The street outside was quiet, only the rustle of leaves. At around 2 in the morning, I awoke to the glow of someone at the window next door. I saw a figure, pale, standing still, arms at sides, looking straight out. Their face hidden in shadow, the body rigid, the light behind them dim but constant. I froze, heart thudding. The figure stayed for maybe 2 minutes. Then the lights flicked off. Then nothing. No footsteps. No movement. It felt like I held breath for those moments. I could not tell if the person moved away inside or simply dissolved into darkness. I do not know if they ever noticed me. I lay there afterward, unable to sleep. I wondered how one human could stay awake so many nights in a row with so little rest. Sleep is essential. I thought sleep would break them. But the next night their pattern continued. I heard door opening at midnight, thuds upstairs, plumbing running in the early hours, everything the same, no sleep, no rest. I started gathering what I could, notes in a journal. Time when I heard what I recorded, lighting, sounds. After a week, the pattern was exact. The neighbor's residence was awake when outside world claimed sleep. Every night, uninterrupted, no lull, no transferring of sound from my house that could be mistaken. And when I thought maybe I would see movement in daylight, I did not. One afternoon, I took a walk around midnight, although moon was high, to inspect the yard of the neighbor's house. I stayed across the street under shadows of trees. I saw curtains undrawn in one upstairs window, but no one there. The bed was made, a few items orderly. The room looked lived in but deserted. I saw chairs set back from a table, maybe a laptop on a desk, maybe a lamp. No signs of recent activity. No laundry, no dishes outside, nothing that screamed daily living. Trash still piled inside garage. Mailbox full. The door padlock looked old, but the knob was clean, polished. Something maintained, but nothing visible. Night after night I heard them pacing, hollow footsteps across wood floors. The squeak of floorboards in long hallways, water running, faint creaks. Sometimes I smelled something weird. Mildew or dampness mixing with cleaner, or a sulfur smell for a moment like chemicals. I also noticed the rhythm of electricity, lights on dim power hum in air conditioning units or fuse boxes. At times the lights flickered like bulbs about to burn out. I wondered if lack of sleep or restlessness was causing blinking, mechanical things vibrating. I began to fear for that person. I worried that living with no rest would break someone, mentally, physically. In my own apartment, I had once pulled an all-nighter. I remembered how my vision blurred, hands shook, mood slipped. For someone to be awake every night for weeks, maybe months, it seemed impossible. But what if they did it by force or trapped or in mental distress? What if something kept them from sleep? Something internal, psychological, or external locked inside that house? I considered reaching out, but hesitation, fear, uncertainty held me back. I did not know their name. I saw no one in yard, no car. Maybe they were dangerous. Maybe medical condition. Maybe delusional. Maybe not well. I questioned whether it was right to intervene. One night I could not sleep. I lay in bed, window cracked for air. The wind brought in scent of rain. At about 3:30 a.m. I heard a sound more rhythmic this time, like someone dropping something heavy, waiting a beat, then dropping another. I thought it must be from the upstairs bedroom. It sounded like weights or boxes hitting floor. Then silence, then dragging sound, low and painful. It sounded like nails scratching hardwood as something heavy moved across. A cupboard, a mattress, a piece of furniture. Then a thump, then nothing. My stomach tightened. Sweat crept down my back. I could not tell if the person had fallen or was moving something deliberately. No calls for help, no crying. It was as though they refused to acknowledge pain or exhaustion. The body must be broken down. I wondered if next morning I might find an ambulance or police. But when morning came, there was no sight of emergency vehicles, no signs of help. Still, the house stayed dark in daylight. When night came again, the lights were on. The sounds resumed. Weeks passed. I stopped sleeping too well. I tried earplugs. I tried sleeping pills. I tried to focus on my own life. But the neighbor's nightly movement became background hum in my mind. One night I dreamt I saw their face. Not a memory, but invented. Hollow eyes, dark sockets. A body thin, skin clammy, veins showing. mouth dry. In my dream, the figure floated downstairs, carrying water, carrying food, pacing. I woke gasping, heart racing. The odor of mildew in air. I knew it was dream, but touched my sheets to feel alive. At the end of that week, I saw a utility truck pull up next door early evening. A man in uniform, badge on his chest. He stepped out, toolbox in hand. I watched through my window. The neighbor's front door opened, slow, rickety. The man stepped in after wiping feet. I saw him moving from room to room, flicking lights on, checking corners. Then he came out again, carrying a white plastic bag, closed tight. Maybe trash. He locked the door behind him. The lights on in the front windows flicked, then dimmed. The truck's engine revved. He left. I imagined he had done a welfare check. Maybe someone had called. I hoped. I thought perhaps something good would happen. But that night the pattern was slightly different. The lights went out earlier. Movement upstairs quieter. Fewer bangs. For a moment I thought rest had been allowed. But at midnight the pacing began again. Water pipes ran. Doors opened, footsteps, everything resumed. I understood now. The presence had not changed. The person was still there. Awake still. No sleep. I started trying to imagine why. I moved to my new apartment late in the summer. I wanted quiet. I had always thought I could handle almost anything, as long as I had sleep. I had my job, my friend group, my quiet evenings at home. I never thought sleep would become a battlefield. I never thought that the person next door, who seemed so normal, could make my nights impossible. This is what I lived through. When I first saw the door across the hall, I noticed the lights. Not bright lights exactly, but a faint glow under the door and sometimes from the window's edges. At first I thought maybe the person inside worked late, had odd hours, maybe was a nurse or someone who kept odd shifts. I was okay with that. I could sleep through a lot of noises, but I couldn't sleep through everything. On the second night I heard floorboards creak. At about 3 in the morning the sound was soft but precise, like someone walking over bare wood. My ceiling was thin. I lay in bed, the sheets loose over my legs, heart beating and ears straining. I listened. There were footsteps, pauses, slow breathing, I thought, but maybe just the sound of air. The window was open, just a crack. The moonlight let me see shapes outside. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was nothing. It happens in old buildings. But the next night it became worse. By the 5th night I was tired. My eyes burned. My body ached. I had always valued sleep, maybe more than I ever knew. I tried wearing earplugs. I tried a fan for white noise. I tried playing music softly, but the scraping on the floor, the thump against walls, the thud as though someone dropped something heavy, the faint sighing, they all came back. Sometimes I felt like the person next door was pacing. Sometimes I felt like they were moving furniture, moving something heavy or scraping nails or tools. What time this was I could not tell. It seemed endless. I checked the apartment door's hinges near midnight. I crept to the door, the cold hallway air filling my nostrils, and I pressed my ear against the wood. I heard nothing at first. Then a soft metallic scrape, dragging sound, maybe a chair leg over tile. Then muffled thumps as though someone dropped weights or metal. I drew back. I felt my muscles tighten, heat in my face. If I knocked, I would risk waking them, and then what? Maybe they would deny, maybe they would stare, maybe it would be worse, so I didn't knock. I retreated to bed, heart racing, trying to count breaths until I drifted into a restless half-sleep. I began to dread the nights. During my days, I tried to distract myself. I walked in the park. I carried coffee with me. I left my phone buzzing. I tried sleeping during the afternoon, hoping to stack rest during daylight so I could survive the nights. Sometimes I drifted into naps on the couch, but night came and no rest came with it. One night I decided I would try to see. I sat by the window facing the neighbor's apartment. The blinds were heavy, thick, but I pried them aside just slightly. A crack of visibility. I saw a thin curtain inside ruffled. A dim lamp in a corner turned on. No shape obvious yet. I stayed very still, breath quiet. I watched the glow under the door flicker as though someone passed by. I saw hands pressing against the curtain fabric. then pulling back, shadows crossing. I saw a figure moving across the floor near the window, then vanish out of sight. Something in me knew. This person never slept. They moved at strange hours. Their body must never rest. I thought, maybe they had an illness, maybe they took something to stay awake. Maybe it was worse. Maybe they were dangerous. I tried to push these thoughts away. I told myself ignorance was safer. Then I began seeing more. One night I woke to a low metallic rattling. My heart beat. I glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. I froze. The rattling became scraping. The wall between our apartments shuddered. The ceiling flexed. I pulled my blankets overhead, but could still hear the noise like someone digging at wood, or tearing drywall, or removing nails. I thought I heard breathing. It was shallow, wondering. I sat up. The floorboard beneath my bed creaked. I shut my eyes. I waited. The noises stopped. Hours later, before dawn, I drifted, half awake. Sleep like a thin veil. In the morning, I saw scratches along the hallway wall near the baseboard outside my door. I had not noticed them before. They were fine lines, claw-like, or perhaps tool marks. I touched the wood. Cold. I tried to think if I had done that or a cat or something, but I had no cat. I had been careful. The marks looked fresh, faint wood dust beneath them. I paused. A kind of dread grew in my chest. Days went by. I began to lose weight. My eyes looked hollow. I went to work, but I would zone out, feel like the day was a blur. Voices sounded distant, loud, echoing. I looked forward to evening. Not because I wanted the rest, but because I wanted to know. Would tonight be worse? Would the person next door push something through the wall? Would the floor collapse? Would something break? Sleep became a dream I tried to reach, but could never touch. One night I decided to record. I set my phone camera on video, pointing at the wall adjoining the neighbor. I turned off all lights in my room, tried to be as still as possible. I lay on the bed, watching the small red light blink on the camera. I waited. The house creaked. Outside a car passed. Somewhere a dog barked. Then around 3:45 a.m., I heard something heavy drag. A chair or a cabinet. It sounded like dragging metal, perhaps, then a heavy thump. The wall vibrated. I froze. On the phone screen, I saw nothing but the wall. But I heard. The dragging lasted over a minute. Then silence. Then soft footsteps pacing back and forth. Then closer to my wall. I heard breathing. I swallowed. I held breath. The wall panel shivered. It sounded like someone had pressed an ear to the wall. Or they leaned heavily, listening. Then the slow sound of cloth. Maybe pants creasing, a sleeve brushing skin. Then footsteps retreating. Silence again. Then the recording ended, because my battery died. I sat up with dread filling me. It was nearly dawn. I flicked on the light. There was a small dent in the wall, a crease in drywall. I pressed my fingers where the panel met the frame. It gave slightly. Out of alignment, I decided I had to do something. I could not continue this. I thought go to management, police, document everything. I collected videos, photos, recordings. I copied them. I wrote notes in a notebook. Dates, times, what I heard. Dragging, breathing, pacing, no sleep, no rest. I pressed little marks on the wall. Some parts seemed loose. The baseboard had nail holes, small splits. I took photos of the scratches outside my door. I tried to find patterns. Always the late night, always after 1 in the morning, sometimes early morning, always persistent. I went to building management. I left the recordings, the photos. I spoke carefully, described my suffering. I asked that they check the apartment next door. That perhaps someone lived there who had issues. That maybe they were destroying the wall, damaging property. They said they would look into it. They asked for my patience. I nodded. Inside I was relieved. Some hope glimmered. That night I listened. Nothing. Silence. The air felt heavy, then calm. I wondered if the neighbor had moved. I wondered if management had already acted. I drifted into sleep around midnight. Deep sleep. I woke once, briefly, heart pounding, but the quiet remained. My body sighed in relief. I slept until morning. 7 hours. My longest rest in weeks. In the morning I went to the management office. They looked at my photos. They said they had knocked. They had seen the cracks. They had heard from other tenants. Someone else across the hall said they heard dragging. Another said they heard footsteps. They suspected the neighbor had been living in bad condition. Floors sagging, wires exposed, maybe health hazard. They said they would bring someone to inspect. After inspection, they asked the neighbor for access to the apartment. The neighbor was uneasy, said something vague about waiting. Eventually, the tenant left. The management opened the unit. Inside, they found furniture arranged oddly. Some items leaned. Floorboards near the wall patched in weird ways. They found no sign of forced sleeping. No bed in the usual spot. A mattress in the corner, folded. The person had rigged parts of the apartment with wood braces, old nails, metal rods as supports in strange ways. Sheets ripped, curtains tied unevenly. No comfortable space. The person was clearly avoiding rest, either by choice or fear. They also found bottles, small vials of substances, over-the-counter pills, caffeine supplements, energy drinks, empty cans everywhere. The person next door had been consuming huge amounts of caffeine, stimulants, refusing rest, perhaps because of some obsession, fear, or mania. They found wires wrapped around furniture, holes where sound seemed to travel, patches covering windows, gaps in walls. The apartment seemed built to muffle sound in some places, but amplify it elsewhere, to escape surveillance or perhaps noise. It was confusing, dangerous. Wires bear risk of fire. The place was unsafe. After that, they forced the person to move out, or into a health facility. They could not legally keep someone like that in such dangerous conditions. I was told later that this neighbor had no other tenants or family nearby, had refused help, had insomnia for months, maybe years. That the person believed neighbors were watching, believed sleep was a danger, believed rest would allow something bad, delusion or obsession or mental illness. But the building managers and local services intervened. Once the unit was restored, wall repaired, drywall replaced, floorboards fixed, the nights began to calm. I slept again. My dreams returned. I woke without dread. No scraping, no dragging, no metallic clinks, no breathing at walls. I